Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry we didn't have the microphone on as I opened up there. Welcome to this April 1st, 2014 edition of Nightcast. That was not meant to be any kind of an April Fool's joke. Actually, today not only is the first day of April 2014, but on the Hebrew calendar, God's sacred calendar, it is the first day of the first month of a brand new year. It is the first day of spring. It's a time for new beginnings, a time for the flowers to bloom out, a time for happiness and joy after a cold winter, and especially after the winter this year, which many newscasters and news organizations were calling the winter from hell. Friends, before we open up our first story, I usually like to jump right into the first story, but let me put our slide up on the screen for just a moment, a slide that depicts the first 6 of 7 seals mentioned in the book of Revelation. All six of these are mentioned in the 6th chapter of the book of Revelation. Let's look over to the 4th one. Go over to the 4th column from the left to the right, the white, the red, the black, the pale. Number 4, the 4th seal is depicted in Revelation 6 as a pale horse whose rider is named Death, and alongside whom this horse and its rider named Death gallops along Hades, hell, the grave. And Jesus Christ described the attributes, the conditions of this horse and its rider in 3 different terms that the gospel writers wrote up: loimus, disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt; seismus, seismic activity, commotions in the air such as gale force winds, commotions on the ground such as earthquakes and the like; and terake, trouble. Not the mega trouble of the Great Tribulation, the 5th seal, but nonetheless trouble. That first one he mentioned, loimos, disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt, relates to our first story tonight. A sad one. The World Health Organization, WHO, says it is taking very seriously the current outbreak of the Ebola virus in West Africa. Its spokesman, Gregory Hartle, stated that it was neither an epidemic nor unprecedented, although medical charity MSF used that word on Monday, yesterday, to describe the outbreak. It has now spread to neighboring Liberia, as well as Guyana's capital, which has a population of 2 million people. Ebola is spread. You'll hear how Ebola is spread in this video with Tulip Mazunder reporting.
Here in southeast Guinea, medics are taking no chances. Some health workers have already been infected. Even touching someone with Ebola without full protective gear could mean a quick death sentence. The outbreak has now spread to the capital, Conakry, home to 2 million people.
We are facing an epidemic of unseen proportions because of its geographical spread. Other epidemics in the past have been much more concentrated than this one. It makes our work much more difficult.
Outbreaks are relatively rare. It happens when the virus makes the jump from its hosts, usually fruit bats, to humans.
The human body has never been in contact with this virus or a similar virus before. So when it does emerge from nature into humans, it wreaks havoc with the immune system and the body in general.
So what makes Ebola one of the deadliest viruses on the planet? Up to 90% of those infected die from the virus. It's highly infectious and can be transmitted by simply touching an infected patient. Symptoms include high fevers, vomiting and heavy bleeding, and eventually organ failure. Ebola is on the move. It's managed to cross into neighbouring Liberia with 4 suspected deaths there. People are also being checked for symptoms in Sierra Leone. But Guinea's president is urging his people and the world not to panic. The World Health Organization has also called for calm. It says whilst the outbreak is a serious concern, it remains relatively limited. Guinea's weak health system can't deal with this alone. Public Health England is one of the many organisations now sending help. But with more than 80 deaths and counting, many remain understandably terrified. Tulip Mazumdar, BBC News.
Friends, NATO ministers have agreed to suspend all practical civilian and military cooperation with Russia. Secretary Anders Fogh Rasmussen said Russia's annexation of Ukraine's Crimea region was the gravest threat to European security for a generation. Now notice the words, friends, that are being said here. That Russia's annexation of Crimea, Ukraine's Crimea, as he puts it, was the gravest threat to European security for a generation. So the interest is, how will this affect the uniting of Europe, which the United States has been interested in trying to help. And the United States people, if we were to look to history and understand what's happening when Europe tries to unite, we're talking about people that, they want to do away with the United States influence. That is not in the United States' best interest in the long run. You got parties over there who want to rule the world, and I'm not talking about Russia. I'm talking about the history of the Assyrian people, Germany. Many of you who watch this program, you know that. I'll have more to say on that after we listen to and see this report from Philippa Thomas.
In NATO, something has changed in the wake of Russia's seizure of Crimea and its continuing military threat to eastern Ukraine. The revival of Cold War tension has given a new urgency to NATO deliberations.
Russia's aggression against Ukraine is the gravest threat to European security in a generation. And it challenges our vision of a Europe whole, free and at peace.
This was the first foreign ministers' meeting since the crisis in the Ukraine. To reassure jittery nerves in Eastern Europe and the Baltic states, the members of NATO are considering boosting deterrence to further incursions, carrying out more surveillance exercises and possibly opening up more military bases. Ukraine is also trying to flex its military muscle. Thousands of National Guard troops are soon to finish training. Even more significant is the approval by Parliament in Kiev to hold joint military exercises with NATO countries. That could put US troops close to Russian forces in Crimea. Meanwhile, Russia is warning Ukraine against any integration with NATO. Hopes for de-escalation of this crisis were raised after a battalion of Russian troops were reported as pulling back from Ukraine's border, but there's scepticism in the West that any broad retreat is underway.
I cannot confirm that Russia is withdrawing its troops. This is not what we are seeing. And this massive military build-up can in no way contribute to a de-escalation of the situation.
Another hurdle for NATO members: can they persuade Russia and Ukraine to engage in direct talks to try to engineer a diplomatic solution? Philippa Thomas, BBC News.
Friends, what you're hearing are things that are very likely to lead to the end of NATO. Now, I plan to have more to say on that tomorrow evening. Now, I have another couple of videos. We're going to be doing a very short program tonight. I had to be away most of the day today for meetings down in Paul Bear Bryant territory, down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, regarding probably this will not happen immediately, but we have to do a lot of the planning, pre-planning ahead of time and getting all of the ducks lined up. But we're talking about a whole brand new program that I may be hosting in the future. I can't say any more about it at this moment. It won't be. It would be in addition to our Nightcast program. Be a totally different, related, but a different program. But tomorrow night, God willing, and the creek don't rise, I plan on discussing more about how, if Russia takes another step or two, and the United States and Europe allows Russia to do this, and they are able to push forward on it, it will very likely, in fact, what's already been done, is likely to be spelling the end of NATO as we've known it. Now, I've got another video, though, I want to show you related to what happened today. Talks between the United States and Russia have ended without a breakthrough on the crisis, with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry having met with Russian counterparts Sergei Lavrov in Paris, but they failed to make a deal. Bridget Kendall has this report.
The following report contains flash photography.
A weary John Kerry arriving for crisis talks in Paris with Sergei Lavrov. These two know each other well, but that doesn't mean they can narrow the gap between the West and Russia. The United States wants Russia to stop intimidating Ukraine by massing its troops on the border. Russia wants Ukraine to become a looser federation, something the government in Kiev has already rejected. 4 hours of talks led to no breakthrough, and deep disagreements remain, like over Russia's annexation of Crimea and threatening use of its troops.
I made clear that the United States still considers the Russian actions to be illegal and illegitimate, and Russia's actions over the past several weeks have placed it at odds, obviously, with the rule of law and the international community, and we still believe on the wrong side of history.
Mr. Lavrov, meanwhile, seemed to signal Russia may now be willing to negotiate directly with the government in Kiev.
We agreed to work with the Ukrainian government and with the Ukrainian people in a wider way to reach fulfillment of peace on priority areas such as minority rights, language rights, achieving disarmament of irregular forces and provocateurs, and achieving inclusive constitutional reform and conducting elections under international observation.
There are good reasons for Mr. Putin to try for a deal at this point, like the need to secure Crimea's water and energy supplies, even though Kiev says it wouldn't cut off Crimea and people it still sees as Ukrainian citizens. There have been blackouts. Then there's the bloodshed that could follow if Russia were to move into other parts of Ukraine. Taking Crimea may have been peaceful. Next time, there's likely to be Ukrainian resistance. And there's the economic cost and diplomatic isolation if Russia pushes this confrontation further. Moscow says sanctions so far have been laughable, but new sanctions would hit harder. But the Russian build-up, as in these pictures near Ukraine's border, tells a different story. Moscow says it's not planning to invade, but the West fears that if Mr. Putin doesn't get his way through diplomacy, he might decide only a military intervention would protect local Russian speakers. Bridget Kendall, BBC News.
Thank you, Bridget. Friends, we're going to end with something very light tonight. Oftentimes, when I see a great big Ferris wheel, it reminds me of an annual festival that the church that I'm affiliated with and have been affiliated with for a long time, that God has called me to. Reminds me of a festival we have each year, because one year that a few of us held a feast in Florida, we were at a location in the Gulf Springs area, just a little bit south of Pensacola, where at the time they had there what was the world's tallest certain kind of Ferris wheel. Now that got outranked by Singapore, and now Singapore has been outranked in that way with what's now being billed as the world's tallest Ferris wheel that has opened in Las Vegas at 168 meters. That'd be 550 feet high. The high roller observation wheel is 3 meters taller than its nearest rival, the Singapore Flyer. And again, because this story reminds me of when we saw what was at the time the highest Ferris wheel observation roller observation wheel in Florida at the time. This is now beat it out in Las Vegas. I wanted to show you and close with this report by BBC's Tom Santorelli.
Las Vegas, home of supersized buildings and outlandish structures, has a new claim to fame on its skyline, the world's tallest Ferris wheel. People queued up at Monday's opening ceremony to be the first to get inside the 28 air-conditioned pods. And if the excesses of Sin City are proving too much, the 30-minute ride and 160-meter high views can offer a bit of perspective.
It was just amazing. You could just see the entire Las Vegas.
It's huge. 40 people can get in there.
But its world's tallest title may be short-lived, as new Ferris wheels are due to open in New York and Dubai in the coming years. Tom Santorelli, BBC News.
Well, these Ferris wheels, they're the tallest. The next thing you know, somebody else done built one taller. Dan, you may remember, you may remember at Feast in Florida when you and I rode an observation wheel like that at the time was being hailed as the world's tallest. And it was a fascinating ride. The air-conditioned units, not the old open Ferris wheel things like, a lot of us knew as kids, but fancy, fandangled, $15 per person ride in those things, Ferris wheel thing. And this reminds me of our annual festival. Something we do each year that pictures part of the plan of salvation that God has for man. We'll talk about that probably more in our weekend reports. Friend, that's it. That's it for tonight's report. I know we're doing a little bit shorter report tonight, but we hit the highlights of today's news for you. And God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be watching intently things tomorrow and have a little more analysis for you in tomorrow night's report, Wednesday night, here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbert, saying thank you for joining me tonight. Until next time, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.